Everyone laughed seeing her arrive simply in a luxury environment of rigid appearances. Treated with contempt, she observed everything in silence, without reacting or explaining herself. Days later, she returns with a millionaire proposal impossible to ignore. If this beautiful story of overcoming and love touched you, subscribe to the channel. Tell us here in the comments from which city you are watching. We really want to know. And if you want to see more stories like this, don't forget to leave your like and share it with someone special. The morning in São Paulo began with that typical Monday movement. Traffic was already forming endless lines on Avenida Faria Lima, while hurried executives walked with their impeccable suits and leather briefcases. In the middle of all this, a woman pedaled peacefully on her old bicycle, dodging cars with the naturalness of someone who knew every corner of that giant city. Marcia was 42 years old, with brown hair tied in a simple ponytail, and she wore faded jeans with a light blue cotton blouse that had seen better days. On her feet, white sneakers worn by time. Under her arm, she carried a hardcover notebook with frayed edges, the kind one buys at a neighborhood stationery store. Nothing about her drew attention, and that was exactly the intention. While pedaling, Marcia observed everything around her with an attentive gaze that few would notice. Every shop window, every mirrored building, every movement of the people on the sidewalk was registered in her mind as if she were cataloging important information, because that was exactly what she was doing. Few people knew, but Marcia was married to Roberto Almeida, one of the most successful technology entrepreneurs in the country. Owner of a company that developed software for large corporations, Roberto had built a silent empire, far from the spotlights and social columns. And Marcia, his companion for over 15 years, shared this same philosophy of discretion. They met at a time when neither of them had much. Roberto was a dedicated programmer who worked consecutive nights to get his ideas off the paper. Marcia was a mathematics teacher at a public school in the East Zone, where she taught with passion and infinite patience. What united them was not money or status, but values, respect, simplicity, and the certainty that appearances never define a person's character. When Roberto's company finally took off, bringing a fortune that neither of them had ever imagined, they made a pact. They would not let money change who they were. They bought a comfortable but not ostentatious house in a quiet neighborhood in the West Zone. They continued attending the same places, keeping the same friends, living with the same authenticity as always. For Marcia especially, it was important not to lose contact with the reality of ordinary people. That is why she still rode a bicycle. That is why she still bought her clothes at popular stores. That is why she still frequented the open-air market on Saturdays and talked to her neighbors about daily problems. And also because of that, she was able to see things that people trapped in bubbles of privilege would never see. That morning, Marcia had a specific goal. She had read in the newspaper about a new luxury real estate development in the Barini region, one of the most valued areas of São Paulo. The advertisement promised high-standard apartments, with sophisticated finishes and a list of benefits designed for a select audience. The advertising was aggressive, with photos of elegant people and impact phrases about exclusivity and distinction. But it wasn't the advertisement that caught Marcia's attention. It was a comment she overheard by chance, days before, while waiting in line at a bakery. Two women were talking loudly, and one of them mentioned how poorly she had been treated when visiting that same showroom. According to her, the salespeople practically ignored her when they realized she wasn't dressed in designer clothes. They offered only superficial information, showed the worst properties available, and made it clear, without saying it directly, that she was not the type of client they were looking for. That kept echoing in Marcia's mind. Not because it was something new. She knew that discrimination based on appearance happened every day, everywhere. But there was something in the way that woman told the story, with a mixture of sadness and indignation, that moved her deeply. Marcia always had a special sensitivity to injustice, perhaps from being a teacher for so many years, accustomed to defending students who were unfairly judged, perhaps from growing up in a simple family where her mother worked as a seamstress and her father was a bus driver. She knew the weight of prejudice, she knew how it hurt, and that was how the idea arose. Marcia would go to that showroom exactly as she was, without changing anything in her appearance, without revealing who she really was or what she had access to. She wanted to see with her own eyes how people treated someone they considered inferior. She wanted to understand if that case was isolated or if there was a pattern. And, mainly, she wanted to discover if there was something that could be done to change that reality. Upon arriving in front of the building where the showroom operated, Marcia got off her bicycle and locked it to a nearby post. The building was imposing, all mirrored, with an impeccable garden at the entrance and a uniformed doorman who observed every person who approached. She took a deep breath, adjusted the notebook under her arm, and walked toward the revolving glass door. The doorman looked her up and down, with a look that mixed surprise and disapproval. He said nothing, but his face spoke for itself. Marcia smiled politely and entered. The internal environment was even more impressive. Shiny marble floors, modern chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling, strategically positioned leather armchairs, and an immense reception with the construction company's logo engraved in golden letters. A few people moved through the space, all impeccably dressed. Men in suits, women with brand-name bags, all talking in low tones while leafing through elegant catalogues. Marcia approached the receptionist, a young blonde woman with straight hair and perfect makeup, who was concentrated on her computer. She waited a few seconds, but the girl did not look up. Then, with a calm voice, Marcia said, "Good morning." The receptionist finally looked up, and her expression changed immediately. Her eyes quickly scanned the simple clothes, the frayed notebook, and then returned to Marcia's face with a type of professional coldness that tried to disguise contempt. "Good morning, can I help you?" she said, in a tone that made it clear she expected the answer to be quick. Marcia kept her smile. "I would like to see the available apartments. I saw the ad in the newspaper and I'm interested." The receptionist blinked, clearly surprised. "Ah, I see. Well, do you have an appointment? We normally work with scheduled times for visits." "I don't have an appointment. I thought I could be seen today, or I can schedule it now if necessary." There was a pause. The receptionist exchanged a quick look with another employee passing by, as if silently asking what she should do. Finally, she sighed discreetly and typed something into the computer. "Let me check if we have a consultant available," she said without enthusiasm. Marcia thanked her and stood there, observing everything around her. She noticed how other people arriving after her were received in a completely different way. A young, well-dressed couple was immediately accompanied by a smiling realtor to a private table. A woman in high heels and sunglasses was received with an espresso served in a porcelain cup. Everyone was treated as if they were special. She, on the other hand, kept waiting. After long minutes, a man approached. He was around 30 years old, wearing a light blue dress shirt and tailored trousers. His hair was perfectly combed, and he carried a tablet under his arm. The name on the badge said, "Fernando Silveira, Real Estate Consultant." "Are you the person interested in the apartments?" he asked, but it wasn't really a question. The tone made it clear he already knew the answer and wasn't excited about it. "Yes, it's me. My name is Marcia." Fernando extended his hand quickly in a mechanical greeting. "Pleasure, let's go to the service room." He led her to a distant table, almost at the back of the showroom, far from the prime areas where other clients were being served. He sat down hurriedly and opened the tablet without looking directly at her. "So you are looking for a property in this region," he began with an impersonal tone. "What would be your investment range?" Marcia noticed the trap in the question. He wanted to know how much she could pay to, probably, direct her only to the cheapest options or even discourage her. She decided not to give that information so easily. "I prefer to see the available options first. Then we can talk about values." Fernando raised his eyebrows, as if that answer were inconvenient. "Right. Well, we have a few apartments still available. Most have already been sold, so options are limited." He began showing images on the tablet, passing quickly through each of them. Without giving Marcia time to really observe the details, he spoke fast, using technical terms without explaining them, and clearly was trying to shorten the conversation. Marcia, however, began asking questions, specific, detailed, technical questions, about the building's structure, the ventilation system, the quality of the materials used in the finish, the common areas, the delivery deadline. Each question was precise, demonstrating deep knowledge about civil construction. Fernando became visibly uncomfortable. He didn't expect that. He tried to respond vaguely, but Marcia insisted, noting everything in her notebook with neat handwriting. "And as for the south-facing units," she asked, "I imagine they have a different value because of the natural lighting, don't they?" He hesitated. "Well, yes, but those units are the most expensive. I don't know if they would be of interest to you." Marcia smiled. "Why wouldn't they be?" The question hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. Fernando had no answer, or rather he did, but he couldn't say it. He couldn't admit he was judging her financial capacity based only on the clothes she wore. "So, Mrs. Marcia, I'll be very direct with you. These units are for a very specific audience, people who really have the conditions to invest in high standards. Perhaps you would prefer to see other developments by the construction company in more accessible regions." Marcia stared at him, keeping her calm. "I understand, but I would like to see all the options here, regardless of the value. May I?" Fernando sighed, clearly irritated. He looked around as if searching for an excuse to end the service. Finally, he stood up. "I'll get the printed material. One moment." He left, and Marcia was alone at the table. She looked around and saw how the other consultants treated their clients. Laughter, detailed demonstrations on models, coffee being served, total attention. With her, everything was different. When Fernando returned, he brought only a few basic brochures. He placed them on the table with little ceremony. "Here is the general information. You can take it and analyze it calmly at home. If you have real interest, you can call to schedule a new visit." Marcia took the brochures, flipped through them quickly, and realized they were just promotional materials without real technical information. Nothing she hadn't already seen on the website. "Thank you," she said, putting the papers in her simple bag. "I will analyze them and get in touch." Fernando was already standing, signaling that the conversation had ended. "It was a pleasure, Mrs. Marcia. Have a good day." She stood up, thanked him again, and walked toward the exit. As she passed the reception, she noticed the young blonde girl didn't even look up. It was as if she were invisible. Already on the sidewalk, Marcia unlocked her bicycle and took a deep breath. She wasn't surprised, she was sad. Sad to confirm that this type of treatment was real, systematic, and intentional. Sad to know that many people went through this every day and had no voice, no power to change. But she did. While pedaling back home, Marcia was already formulating a plan. It wasn't going to stay like this, not this time. She didn't know exactly how, but she knew she was going to do something. Something that didn't just involve complaining or suing, but that would really transform that situation, because Marcia believed in justice. And she believed that people needed to be held accountable for the consequences of their choices, especially when those choices hurt other people. Upon arriving home, a cozy residence with a garden in front and a wooden gate, she found Roberto in the living room working on his laptop. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "How was the outing?" he asked, knowing well that determined look on his wife's face. Marcia placed her bag on the sofa and sat beside him. "It was exactly as I imagined, maybe even worse." Roberto closed the laptop and gave her his full attention. "Tell me." And Marcia told him. Every detail, every look, every word. Roberto listened to her in silence with that serious expression that appeared when he knew something important was about to happen. When she finished, he held her hand and asked, "And what do you want to do?" Marcia looked into his eyes, and for the first time that day she allowed the indignation to show in her voice. "I want to show them they were wrong. I want them to understand that appearance defines no one. And I want this to change, truly." Roberto nodded slowly. "Then let's make it happen." And at that moment, without knowing exactly how, Marcia felt that something bigger was about to begin, a journey that would go beyond a simple act of revenge, a journey that could transform lives, open eyes, and perhaps teach a lesson that would never be forgotten. The following days were of intense activity for Marcia, but no one looking from the outside would notice. She continued her normal routine, pedaling through the city, attending the market, talking to neighbors. Apparently, nothing had changed, but inside her mind worked non-stop, connecting information, formulating strategies, seeking answers. The first thing Marcia did was return to that bakery where she had heard the woman's account. She went back at the same time, on the same day of the week, hoping to find her again. And she was lucky. The woman was there, choosing bread in the same line. Marcia approached gently. "Excuse me, sorry to bother you. I don't know if you remember, but last week I was here and heard you commenting about a real estate showroom, the one in Barini." The woman looked at her, surprised but not with suspicion. She was a lady of about 50, with grey hair and a tired expression on her face. "Ah, yes, I remember talking about that. Why?" Marcia chose her words carefully. "Because I went through the same situation. I went there this week and was also treated poorly, and I was wondering if this was common or if they were isolated cases." The woman's expression changed immediately. A mixture of relief and indignation took over her face. "So it wasn't just me. I knew it. I knew that was purposeful." They left the bakery together and sat on a bench in the nearby plaza. The woman, who introduced herself as Vera, began telling her story in detail. She had gone to the showroom because she was looking for an apartment for her daughter, who had gotten a good job and finally had the conditions to buy her first property. Vera wanted to help with the choice since she understood construction after working for years as an administrative assistant at a construction company. But when she arrived there, wearing simple clothes and speaking directly, she was treated as if she were wasting everyone's time. They offered only the cheapest units with vague descriptions. When she asked about specific floor plans and technical details, the realtor responded evasively and impatiently. Vera left there certain that she was not welcome, even though she had the money and real conditions to close a deal. Marcia listened attentively, noting everything mentally. "Did you ever file a formal complaint?" Vera shook her head. "No, I thought about doing it, but I thought it wouldn't lead to anything. Who would believe me? They are a large, respected construction company. I'm just another ordinary person. In the end, I gave up, and my daughter ended up buying somewhere else." That sentence echoed in Marcia's mind. How many people thought like that? How many simply gave up, believing they had no power to change anything? "Vera, would you mind if I talk to your daughter as well? I want to better understand this situation." Vera agreed without hesitation and passed on the contact. In the following days, Marcia spoke with Camilla, Vera's daughter, who confirmed everything, and even added that she knew other people who had gone through similar experiences with the same construction company. That was how Marcia's investigation began to grow. One contact led to another. Camilla referred a co-worker named Patricia, who had also been discouraged from buying an apartment in that development. Patricia, in turn, knew a neighbor, Rodrigo, who had a frustrating experience trying to negotiate at the same showroom. Each story was different in the details, but all shared the same pattern. People who didn't fit the expected visual profile were subtly pushed away. It wasn't a direct refusal, which would be illegal and easily provable. It was a set of small actions that, added up, created a hostile and discouraging environment. Realtors who served with haste, superficial information, limited options, veiled suspicion, invasive questions about financial capacity made right at the start, comparisons with other developments in less valued areas, always with a professional smile, always with apparent politeness, but with a very clear subliminal message: you don't belong here. Marcia organized all these accounts in her notebook. She created a kind of informal dossier, noting names, dates, and specific details of the service received. They weren't just loose stories. It was a systematic behavioral pattern. In parallel, she began researching the construction company responsible for the development. The company was called Constructora Pinheiros Premium, a pompous name that already said a lot about the image they wanted to project. On the official website, she found photos of luxury buildings, testimonials from satisfied clients, and an institutional discourse about excellence and commitment to quality. But when she went below the surface, she began finding different information. On websites specialized in economics and the real estate market, there were recent articles mentioning that Pinheiros Premium was facing difficulties. Several units of their developments had been sitting for months without being sold. Deadlines with suppliers were being renegotiated. There were rumors of liquidity problems. Marcia knew this was common in the real estate market, especially in times of economic instability. But that lit a light in her mind. If the company needed capital, it was vulnerable. And vulnerability, when well utilized, could be the key to real change. She decided to go deeper. She asked for help from Roberto, who had contacts in the business world. He discreetly obtained more precise information. Pinheiros Premium had a considerable debt with a bank, and the deadline for payment was approaching. If they couldn't sell the remaining units quickly, they would have serious problems. This information changed everything. It wasn't just a moral or ethical issue, it was also a practical issue. The company needed money, and Marcia had access to it. But it wasn't just about buying apartments. It was about using that need to create a situation where change was inevitable. Meanwhile, Marcia also began observing another important aspect. Among the people who had been treated poorly, there was one who especially caught her attention. It was a young man named Daniel, 28 years old, with a degree in architecture and interior design. Daniel had sought out the showroom because he was interested not only in buying an apartment, but also in proposing a professional partnership. He had interesting ideas on how to improve the presentation of the spaces and make the properties more attractive. But he was received with disdain. He offered his portfolio, but the commercial manager hardly looked at it. They said they already had hired professionals and were not interested in new projects. What hurt Daniel the most wasn't the refusal itself, but the way it was done. He realized that the manager didn't even consider his proposal seriously. He judged him by his young appearance, his casual clothes, his backpack instead of an executive briefcase. Daniel left there feeling humiliated and devalued. Marcia talked to him at length. Daniel was talented, had a different eye for spaces and a solid education. He had worked on important projects, but was still building his name in the market. He was exactly the type of professional who deserved an opportunity, but was constantly ignored for not having the traditional corporate look. It was in this conversation that Marcia began to visualize something bigger. It wasn't just about punishing inappropriate behavior. It was about creating an opportunity for reparation, to show that change didn't just come from criticism, but from concrete actions that benefited those who had been wronged. During these weeks, Roberto observed Marcia work with admiration. He knew that sparkle in her eyes. It was the same sparkle he saw when she was in the classroom, defending a student who had been treated unfairly by another teacher. It was passion. It was purpose. It was the essence of who she was. One night, while they were having dinner together in the kitchen at home, Roberto asked, "You already know what you're going to do, don't you?" Marcia smiled. "I'm starting to have an idea, but I need to be sure it will work. I don't just want to make noise, I want real results." Roberto took her hand over the table. "You always achieve what you set out to do. I trust you." This support meant everything to Marcia. It wasn't just the access to financial resources that Roberto could offer, it was the trust, the partnership, the certainty that they were in this together. Because deep down, that wasn't just Marcia's fight. It was the fight of everyone who believed that people deserve to be treated with dignity, regardless of how they dress or where they come from. In the days that followed, Marcia continued collecting information. She discovered that Pinheiros Premium had a history of questionable practices, not just in discriminatory service, but also in labor issues. Employees complaining of moral harassment, abusive goals, psychological pressure. Nothing that had become a public scandal, but enough to show that the problems were structural, not isolated. She also discovered who the people behind the company were. The CEO was a man named Otavio Medeiros, 55 years old, known for his aggressive management style. He valued results above all and had little patience for issues he considered secondary, such as employee well-being or ethics in service. For him, the real estate market was a game of numbers, and people were just pieces in that game. There was also a commercial manager, Fabio Costa, who was directly responsible for the showroom. It was he who defined the service guidelines, who trained the realtors, who established the standards, and according to the accounts Marcia collected, it was he who encouraged, even if indirectly, that culture of discrimination based on appearance. Marcia realized it wasn't enough to change only the realtors. It was necessary to change the whole structure. It was necessary for the people in command to understand that their choices had consequences, and that those consequences could be financial, professional, and reputational. But Marcia didn't want to destroy the company. It wasn't about revenge, it was about transformation. She believed that people could change when confronted in the right way, and companies too. That was when she finalized her plan. It was bold, risky, but it had potential. She would return to the showroom, but this time not just as an observer. She would return with a concrete proposal. A proposal they couldn't refuse, but that would come with conditions. Conditions that would force real changes. Before putting the plan into action, Marcia wanted to talk again with all the people who had shared their stories. She scheduled individual meetings, explained what she intended to do, and asked if they would be willing to contribute if necessary. All agreed, some with hope, others with skepticism, but all with the desire that something would change. Vera, the first person she had talked to, said something that stuck with her. "You know, Marcia, I've lost count of how many times I've been judged by my appearance. I've gotten used to it, in a way, but I never accepted it. If you really manage to do something, you will be doing it not only for me, but for all the people who go through this and have no way to defend themselves." These words reinforced Marcia's determination. It wasn't about her. It never had been. It was about all the invisible, discarded, underestimated people. It was about proving that they mattered. On the eve of the day she would return to the showroom, Marcia spent hours reviewing her notebook. Every testimonial, every detail, every piece of financial information, everything was organized, documented, ready to be used if necessary. But she knew the true strength of her plan wasn't in the documents, it was in the strategy and in the surprise. Roberto observed her from afar, admired and at the same time concerned. "Are you sure about this, Marcia? You don't need to do anything so risky. We can solve it in other ways." Marcia looked at him and smiled. "I know, but I want them to truly understand. I want them to feel in their skin what it's like to be underestimated. And then I want them to see that there is another way." Roberto nodded. "Then do it your way, but know that I will be here supporting you at every step." That night, Marcia slept peacefully. She had no fear, she had no doubt. She knew exactly what she was about to do, and she knew that regardless of the result, she would have done what she believed to be right. Because, for Marcia, justice was not an abstract concept. It was something built with actions, one at a time, and she was about to take a giant step in that construction. When the sun rose the next day, Marcia dressed in the same simple clothes as always. The same jeans, the same cotton blouse, the same worn sneakers. She took her old bicycle, her frayed notebook, and left home with the same tranquility as someone going to shop at the market. But this time, she wasn't just going to observe. This time, she was going to act. And the Pinheiros Premium Real Estate Showroom was about to discover that they had underestimated the wrong person. Marcia's second visit to the showroom happened on a Thursday afternoon, when the movement was a bit more intense than usual. There were more clients moving around, more realtors busy, more energy in the air. She purposely chose this time. She wanted there to be witnesses to what was about to happen. She arrived in the same way as the first time, by bicycle with simple clothes, notebook under her arm. She locked the bicycle to the same post, took a deep breath, and entered. The doorman, the same one from the previous time, made the same expression of disapproval. Some things never changed, but Marcia knew others were about to change completely. The internal environment remained impeccable. Shiny marble, elegant chandeliers, soft ambient music, everything designed to convey luxury and exclusivity. Marcia walked to the reception, where the same young blonde girl was sitting, now talking animatedly with a well-dressed client. When Marcia approached, the conversation was interrupted. The receptionist looked at her, and there was a brief flash of recognition in her eyes. She remembered. "Good afternoon," Marcia said with politeness. "I would like to speak with the person in charge of the commercial sector." The receptionist blinked, surprised. "The commercial manager. He is quite busy at the moment. Do you have an appointment?" "I don't, but I believe he will want to receive me." There was something in Marcia's voice, a quiet firmness that made the receptionist hesitate. She wasn't asking, she was stating. And that was different from the first visit, when Marcia had been only polite and patient. "I'll check," the receptionist said, picking up the phone. While waiting, Marcia observed the showroom. She recognized Fernando, the realtor who had served her the first time. He was with another client, smiling, gesturing, clearly committed to closing a sale. When his eyes crossed with Marcia's, he stopped for a moment, confused, trying to remember where he had seen her. Then he recognized her and quickly looked away, returning his attention to the client. The receptionist returned. Mr. Fabio can receive you in a few minutes. He asked that you wait there in the waiting area." Marcia thanked her and went to one of the leather armchairs. She sat down, placed the notebook on her lap and waited. Around her, other people talked, closed deals, drank coffee served in fine cups. No one offered her anything. No one even looked in her direction. After 15 minutes, a man of approximately 40 approached. He wore an impeccable grey suit, polished leather shoes, and an expensive watch on his wrist. His hair was perfectly cut, and his eyes had that expression of someone accustomed to evaluating people in seconds. "Mrs. Marcia, I'm Fabio Costa, commercial manager. I heard you would like to speak with me." He extended his hand and Marcia shook it firmly. "Yes, thank you for receiving me. I have a proposal that I believe is in the company's interest." Fabio raised his eyebrows, clearly curious but also skeptical. "Let's go to my office." She followed him down a side corridor to a large room with a glass table, shelves with awards and certificates, and a panoramic view of the city. Fabio pointed to a chair and sat behind the desk, assuming a posture of authority. "So, Mrs. Marcia, how can I help you?" Marcia placed the notebook on the desk and looked directly into his eyes. "I was here a few weeks ago. I came to see the available apartments, but the service I received was, to say the least, inadequate." Fabio crossed his arms defensively. "Inadequate in what sense?" "I was treated differently from the other clients. I was directed to the cheapest options, received superficial information, and clearly noticed that my appearance influenced the type of service I received." Fabio sighed, with an expression that tried to look understanding but was only condescending. "Mrs. Marcia, our realtors are trained to identify each client's profile and offer the most suitable options. This is not discrimination, it's efficiency. It avoids wasting time for both parties." Marcia kept her calm. "I understand, but what if I tell you that I have the capacity to buy not just one apartment, but all of them that are available in this development?" The room went silent. Fabio stared at her, processing what he had just heard. Then, slowly, a cynical smile formed on his lips. "With all due respect, ma'am, that is a rather bold statement." Marcia opened the notebook and removed a sheet she had prepared. On it were listed all the units still available, with measurements, values, and technical specifications. Information she had collected through detailed research and discreet contacts. "According to my information, you have 12 units unsold in this development. 3 penthouses, 6 three-bedroom apartments, and 3 two-bedroom ones. The total value, considering the advertised prices, would be approximately 22 million reais. I am willing to make an offer of 20 million in cash, closing in 1 week." Fabio took the sheet, read it attentively, and his smile disappeared. That wasn't a bluff, the information was correct, too precise to be just guesses. "Are you serious?" "Completely. But my proposal comes with conditions." Fabio leaned forward, now totally focused. "What kind of conditions?" Marcia took a deep breath. It was the crucial moment. "First, I want full access to the company's documents related to this development. Approved plans, permits, records of previous sales. I need to be sure I am making a safe investment." Fabio nodded. "That is standard, no problem." "Second, I want the transaction to be done with total transparency, and for the amounts to be used primarily to pay off the debts I know the company has." Now Fabio was visibly uncomfortable. "How do you know about our debts?" Marcia smiled slightly. "Let's say I did my homework. I know Pinheiro's premium is on tight deadlines and that this sale would solve a large part of the financial problems. That's why I believe my proposal is interesting for both parties." Fabio leaned back in his chair, completely re-evaluating who was sitting in front of him. That was not an ordinary client. She was not someone who could be dismissed with vague excuses. "And what would the third condition be?" Marcia closed the notebook slowly. "The third condition I prefer to present directly to the CEO, Mr. Otavio Medeiros, if I am not mistaken." Fabio hesitated. "That is not protocol. I am responsible for all commercial negotiations." "I understand, but this specific condition concerns the company's structure and internal practices. I believe it is a matter that needs to be handled at the board level." There was a long pause. Fabio was clearly divided between the desire to close that multi-million sale and the discomfort of losing control of the negotiation. Finally, he sighed. "I will talk to Mr. Ottavio, but I cannot guarantee that he will receive you." Marcia stood up, took her notebook and handed him a simple card with just her name and phone number. "I will wait for the contact. I have until the end of the week to decide if I maintain the proposal or if I look for other investment opportunities." It was a subtle but effective pressure. She wasn't begging for attention. She was offering a solution to a problem they had, and she made it clear there was a deadline. Fabio took the card and accompanied Marcia to the door. When she left the room, he stood still for a few moments, looking at that small piece of paper. Something had changed. He didn't know exactly what, but he felt that this simple woman, whom he wouldn't even have noticed on the first visit, had just turned the game around. Marcia left the showroom with the same tranquility she had entered with. She unlocked her bicycle, but before leaving she looked once more at the mirrored building. She knew that at that moment Fabio was already on the phone with Ottavio. She knew her proposal was being discussed, and she knew their curiosity about the third condition was too great to be ignored. She pedaled back home thinking about every detail of the conversation. It had worked exactly as she planned. She didn't reveal everything at once. She created mystery, she created urgency, and mainly, she created respect. When she arrived home, Roberto was on the porch watering the plants. He saw her arrive and immediately realized from her face that something important had happened. "And so?" Marcia smiled. "The bait has been cast, now we wait." Roberto dropped the watering can and hugged her. "You are incredible, you know." Marcia rested her head on his shoulder. "Not yet, but I will be." The next morning the phone rang. It was Fabio. His voice had a different tone, more respectful, almost deferential. "Mrs. Marcia, good morning. Mr. Ottavio would like to receive you this afternoon, if possible. He is very interested in knowing the details of your proposal." Marcia smiled. It was working. "I will be there at 3 o'clock. "Perfect. I will have you registered at the reception." When Marcia hung up the phone, she felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. The true challenge was about to begin, because presenting the financial proposal was easy. The hard part would be presenting the condition that really mattered, the condition that could change everything. She spent the rest of the morning reviewing every argument, every word she would use. There could be no room for error. She needed to be firm, but not aggressive, clear, but not inflexible, just, but not naive. Roberto observed her from afar, admiring her dedication. At one point he approached and asked him, "Are you afraid?" Marcia thought for a moment. "I am, but I also have hope, and I think hope is bigger." At 2:30 in the afternoon, Marcia got ready. She dressed in the same simple clothes as always. She could have chosen something different, something that showed her true position. But no. She wanted them to see her exactly as she was. No masks, no disguises. If the proposal were accepted, it would be because it made sense, not because she fit their visual profile. When she arrived at the showroom at exactly 3 o'clock, the receptionist received her in a completely different way. She smiled, offered water, coffee, and led her immediately to a meeting room on the top floor of the building. It was a room even more impressive than Fabio's, a huge table of noble wood, genuine leather chairs, a projection screen, and a spectacular view of São Paulo. Fabio was already there, accompanied by another man. This one was older, with grey hair, gold-rimmed glasses, and an imposing presence. He wore a navy blue suit that probably cost more than many people's cars. It was Ottavio Medeiros. He stood up when Marcia entered and extended his hand with a professional smile. "Mrs. Marcia, it's a pleasure to meet you. I am Ottavio Medeiros, CEO of Pinheiros Premium." Marcia shook his hand firmly. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Ottavio." They sat down, and Fabio placed some folders with documents on the table. Ottavio crossed his hands on the table and went straight to the point. "Fabio passed on the details of your proposal to me. I confess I was impressed. It's not every day we receive an offer to buy all the available units of a development, but before we move forward, I would like to better understand who you are and where this interest comes from." Marcia knew that question would come. "My name is Marcia Almeida. I am married to Roberto Almeida from Almeida Tech Solutions. Perhaps you know it." Otavio's eyes widened. "Roberto Almeida? The Roberto Almeida from the software company?" "The same one." Otavio's expression changed completely. Suddenly, everything made sense. The millionaire proposal, the confidence, the detailed knowledge about the company's situation. That was not an ordinary woman. She was the wife of one of the most successful businessmen in the country. Fabio also seemed shocked. He looked at Marcia with a mixture of surprise and embarrassment. He was probably recalling how he had treated her on the first visit. Otavio cleared his throat, recomposing himself. "Well, that certainly changes the context. And what would your interest be in this development specifically?" Marcia decided to be honest, to a certain point. "My husband and I believe in diversifying investments. Real estate is an area that has always interested us. This development has potential, excellent location, quality finish, and I believe that with the right management, it can become very profitable." Otavio nodded, satisfied with the answer. "And as for the third condition, Fabio mentioned that you preferred to discuss it directly with me." Marcia took a deep breath. It was time. "Yes, the third condition is that the company review its customer service practices, and that it integrate into its staff a qualified professional who was previously ignored due to prejudices based on appearance." The silence that followed was heavy. Otavio and Fabio exchanged looks, clearly uncomfortable. Finally, Otavio asked, "What exactly are you talking about?" Marcia opened her notebook and began to explain. Each case, each testimonial, each pattern of discrimination she had identified. She spoke calmly but firmly. She didn't accuse. She just presented facts. And when she finished, Otavio's face was closed. Not with anger, but with something that seemed like shame mixed with denial. The condition was set. The proposal was on the table. And now everything depended on how those men would react to the mirror Marcia had just placed in front of them. Otavio Medeiros stepped away from the table and walked to the window, observing the city below. Fabio remained seated, nervously fiddling with a pen. The silence in the room was dense, charged with tension and discomfort. Finally, Otavio turned around. "Mrs. Marcia, with all due respect, you are mixing completely different issues. One thing is to make a real estate investment. Another, completely distinct, is trying to interfere in the internal operations of a consolidated company." Marcia kept her calm. "I don't see them as different issues, Mr. Otavio. I am proposing a significant investment in a company that, according to my research, urgently needs capital. In exchange, I ask that inappropriate practices be corrected. It seems like a fair trade to me." Fabio intervened with a defensive tone. "What inappropriate practices? Our realtors are trained professionals. If there was some isolated misunderstanding, we can investigate. But accusing the company of having a discriminatory pattern is a serious statement." Marcia opened her notebook and removed several sheets. "It is not an accusation. They are documented facts. I have here accounts from 7 different people who were treated inadequately in this showroom in the last 6 months. All share the same profile, simple appearance, casual clothes, and all were discouraged, ignored, or directed toward inferior options, even though they had real financial conditions to buy." She placed the sheets on the table. Otavio looked at them but didn't pick them up. Fabio, however, reached out and began to read. His face grew increasingly pale as he moved through the testimonials. Marcia continued. "One of these people is Vera Santos, 52 years old, worked for 20 years in a construction company, and knows technical construction details better than many engineers. She came here to help her daughter choose an apartment. She had a budget of 1,200,000 reais. She was served for less than 10 minutes and left without even seeing a full floor plan." Fabio looked up, vaguely recognizing the name. Marcia took another sheet. "Patricia Fernandez, 34 years old, entrepreneur in the food business. She arrived here after selling her business with 2 million in hand to invest. She was treated with suspicion and impatience because she was wearing jeans and sneakers. She closed a deal with a competitor of yours 3 days later." Otavio's expression began to change. It was no longer just defensive. There was something that seemed to be concern. "And there is also Rodrigo Campos," Marcia continued. "Architect, 29 years old. He came here not only as a potential buyer, but also to offer a professional partnership. He was dismissed in 5 minutes because the commercial manager," She looked directly at Fabio. Thought he was just an intern wasting time. Fabio looked away. Marcia realized he knew exactly which case she was talking about. But the case that bothered me the most, Marcia said, taking a final sheet, was that of Daniel Moreira, 28 years old, graduated in architecture and interior design from FAU USP, with a specialization in high-standard residential projects. He worked in renowned offices and has an impressive portfolio. He came to you with a consultancy proposal to improve the presentation of the apartments in the showroom. Innovative ideas that could significantly increase the attractiveness of the properties. She made a dramatic pause. He was received by you, Fabio. You looked at the portfolio for less than 2 minutes. You said you weren't interested. Daniel left here feeling he had wasted his time. 3 months later, he saw the same ideas he had suggested being implemented here. But by another professional, of course. A professional who probably charged 3 times more and had half the competence. Fabio was visibly shaken. I don't remember this specific case. I received many proposals. I'm sure you do. But how many do you actually analyze? How many do you discard just because the person doesn't seem to have the profile you consider suitable? The question hung in the air. Fabio had no answer. Or rather, he did, but he didn't want to admit it. Ottavio returned to the table and sat down heavily. Mrs. Marcia, even if some of these cases are true, and I'm not saying they aren't, it doesn't mean there is a policy of discrimination. It could just be individual failures of some employees. Marcia shook her head. Mr. Ottavio, when 7 different cases happen in the same place with identical patterns, it's not an individual failure. It's organizational culture. And organizational culture comes from the top. It comes from the leadership that defines what is acceptable and what isn't. Ottavio clenched his fists on the table. And what exactly do you want us to do? Fire all the realtors? Change the company's entire operation? No, Marcia replied calmly. I want you to recognize that there is a problem. I want you to train your employees properly on how to treat all clients with respect, regardless of appearance. And I want you to give a real opportunity to someone who was wronged. And that someone would be Daniel Moreira, Ottavio concluded. Exactly. Fabio crossed his arms. And what do you want us to do with him? Hire him out of pity? Marcia looked firmly at him. Not out of pity, out of justice, and because he is good, very good. If you really looked at his work without prejudice, you would see that he can add real value to the company. Ottavio rubbed his face with his hands, clearly tired. Mrs. Marcia, you need to understand our position. We are a traditional company with a reputation built over decades. Accepting these conditions would be like publicly admitting that we made serious mistakes. This could damage our image. Marcia leaned forward. And what is the alternative? Continue doing what you've always done? Continue losing potential clients because your employees judge by appearance? Continue wasting talents like Daniel simply because he doesn't fit a superficial visual pattern? She paused, letting the words sink in. And more importantly, what is the cost of not accepting my proposal? How many units will you manage to sell in the coming months? How many weeks do you have before the deadlines with creditors expire? Ottavio went rigid. How do you know so much about our financial situation? Marcia smiled slightly. Mr. Ottavio, when you have access to the right resources and know where to look, information is not hard to get. And this information tells me that you don't have much time. It also tells me that my proposal can solve almost all your problems at once. Fabio looked at Ottavio, waiting for some guidance. The CEO was visibly divided. On one side, the urgent need for capital. On the other, pride and resistance to admitting failures. Marcia realized it was time to change the approach. Mr. Ottavio, may I ask a personal question? He hesitated but nodded. Do you have children? I do, 2 daughters. And if one of them one day walked into a store, a bank, anywhere, and was treated with contempt just because she was wearing simple clothes, how would you feel? The question hit home. Ottavio looked down, and for the first time Marcia saw a crack in his professional armor. There was humanity there. There was empathy, buried under layers of corporate pragmatism. I would be furious, he admitted softly. Exactly. Because when it happens to someone we love, suddenly we see the injustice clearly. But when it happens to strangers, it's easy to ignore, minimize, justify. That is what is happening here. I'm not asking you to destroy the company. I'm asking you to look at these people who are someone's daughters, sons, mothers, fathers, and recognize that they deserve to be treated better. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer tense, it was reflective. Fabio finally spoke with a softer voice. And if we accept the condition about Daniel, how exactly would it work? Marcia breathed a sigh of relief. It was the first real sign of openness. Daniel would be hired as an interior design consultant. He would have autonomy to propose improvements in the presentation of the apartments, create settings, suggest aesthetic changes. And he would be treated like any other qualified professional, with respect and valuation of his work. And as for the review of service practices, Ottavio asked. Mandatory training for all realtors and showroom employees. It can be done discreetly, as part of a professional improvement program. It doesn't have to be scandalous, but it needs to be real. Ottavio looked at Fabio. What do you think? Fabio sighed. I think we don't have many options. The financial proposal is too good to refuse, and if we do this right, maybe it will even help us improve for real. Ottavio nodded slowly. Then he turned to Marcia. I'll be honest with you, this isn't easy for me. I don't like admitting that my company failed in something as fundamental as treating people with respect. But you are right, there is a problem, and pretending it doesn't exist won't solve it. He extended his hand. We have a deal, Mrs. Marcia. I accept your conditions, all of them. Marcia shook his hand, feeling a wave of emotion. It wasn't just a victory, it was transformation. It was the beginning of something that could change lives. I will prepare the contracts, Fabio said. How much time do we need to finalize everything? Marcia thought quickly. 1 week for the documentation, another for the financial transfer, and I want Daniel to start working even before the official closing. I want him to participate in the process of setting up the apartments I am acquiring. Fabio agreed. I will get in touch with him personally. No, Marcia said firmly. I will speak with him personally. I want to explain everything first. Ottavio observed Marcia with an expression that mixed respect and admiration. You are an impressive woman, you know. You came here dressed simply, knowing you would be underestimated. You used that to your advantage. You collected information, built a solid case, and put us in a position where refusing would be irrational. That is high-level strategy. Marcia smiled. Thank you, Mr. Ottavio. But I didn't do this to impress you. I did it because I believe it's possible to change the world, one interaction at a time. And because I believe that people like Daniel, Vera, Patricia, and so many others deserve a fair chance. When Marcia left that meeting room, she felt the weight of responsibility. She had achieved what she wanted, but now she needed to ensure that it wasn't just an agreement on paper. She needed it to be real. Outside the building, she unlocked her bicycle and stood for a moment looking at the showroom. Tomorrow everything would be different. Tomorrow, Daniel would have an opportunity. Tomorrow those realtors would begin to learn that appearance does not define value. She pedaled home with a light heart, but her mind was still working. There was much to do: talk to Daniel, prepare the documentation, follow the implementation of the training. But for the first time in weeks, Marcia felt she had taken a concrete step toward justice. When she arrived home, Roberto was in the garden taking care of the plants. He saw her, dropped everything, and ran to meet her. Did you do it? Marcia nodded, and tears began to roll down her face. They were tears of relief, of joy, of realization. I did it. They accepted everything. Roberto hugged her tight. I knew you would achieve it. I always knew. That night, Marcia called Daniel. He answered on the third ring with a tired voice of someone who had had a long day. Daniel, it's Marcia. We talked last week about your experience at the Pinheiros Premium showroom. Ah, yes. Hi, Marcia. How are you? I'm well. Very well, actually. And I have news for you. Are you free tomorrow morning? I would like to talk in person. Daniel hesitated. About what? About an opportunity. A real opportunity. There was a pause. Marcia could imagine Daniel processing that, trying to understand what was happening. Finally, he responded. I'm free. Where do you want to meet? Marcia smiled. How about that coffee shop near Villa Maddalena station? I know a quiet place where we can talk. Deal. What time? 10 in the morning. I'll be there. When she hung up, Marcia stared at the phone for a long moment. Tomorrow she would tell Daniel that everything had changed, that he would have a chance, that his talent would be recognized. And that, more than any signed contract or transferred money, was what really mattered. Because in the end, real change doesn't just happen in spreadsheets and documents. It happens when people who have been marginalized receive opportunities, when hidden talents are revealed, when justice stops being an abstract concept and becomes a tangible reality. Marcia slept that night with the feeling that she had done something truly worthwhile. And tomorrow, when she looked into Daniel's eyes and saw hope reborn, she would know that every step, every difficult conversation, every moment of tension had been worth it. Because some battles are not fought with weapons or shouts, they are fought with patience, strategy, and the unshakable conviction that doing right is always worth the fight. The coffee shop near Villa Maddalena station was one of those cozy places that Marcia loved. Exposed brick walls, rustic wooden tables, the smell of fresh coffee in the air, and a soft playlist of Brazilian music playing in the background. She arrived a few minutes before 10 and chose a table in the corner away from the movement. Daniel appeared punctually. Marcia recognized him immediately from the description he had given during the previous telephone conversation. Tall, curly hair tied in a low bun, round-framed glasses, and an expression that mixed curiosity and caution. He wore olive-green cargo pants, a simple white shirt and comfortable sneakers. He carried a backpack that probably contained his tablet and work materials. "Marcia?" he asked, approaching the table. She smiled and stood up to greet him. "Yes, it's me. Pleasure to meet you in person, Daniel. Sit down, please." They settled in, and Marcia ordered 2 coffees. Daniel observed her with a mixture of expectation and suspicion. It was clear he didn't know what to expect from that meeting. "Thank you for coming," Marcia began. "I know you must be curious about the reason for this meeting." Daniel nodded. "To be honest, I was quite confused. You mentioned an opportunity but didn't give many details." Marcia took a deep breath. It was time to tell the whole story. "I'll be direct with you, Daniel. A few weeks ago I went through an experience very similar to the one you had at the Pinheiros Premium showroom. I went there, dressed simply, and was treated with contempt. This bothered me deeply, so I began to investigate if it was an isolated case or if there was a pattern." Daniel leaned forward, totally focused. "I discovered it wasn't isolated. I found several people who went through the same thing, and you were one of those people. When I heard your story about how you went there with a serious professional proposal and were simply dismissed, I was indignant. Because it wasn't just about disrespect, it was about a waste of talent." She paused, observing Daniel's expression change from curiosity to something deeper, a mixture of contained emotion and cautious hope. "So I decided to do something about it," Marcia continued. "I went back to the showroom, but this time with a different proposal. A proposal they couldn't refuse, and part of that proposal was that you be integrated into their team as an interior design consultant." Daniel's eyes widened. He sat in silence for a long moment, processing what he had just heard. "Sorry, I think I didn't understand correctly. Are you saying you got them to hire me?" "Yes," Marcia confirmed with a smile. "And not as a favor or out of pity, but because I showed them that you are talented, qualified, and that they wasted an opportunity when they ignored you. They agreed to hire you as part of a larger deal we closed." Daniel put his hands to his face, clearly moved. When he removed his hands, his eyes were moist. "I don't know what to say. This is surreal. Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." Marcia held his hand over the table. "I did it because I believe in justice, and because I believe that when we see an injustice and have the power to correct it, we have the responsibility to act. You were treated unfairly. Your talent was ignored. That wasn't right. And now it's being corrected." A tear rolled down Daniel's face. He wiped it away quickly but couldn't hide the emotion. "You have no idea what this means to me. After that experience there, I began to question if it was really worth continuing to try, if I really had value as a professional. I began to think maybe the problem was me." Marcia squeezed his hand harder. "The problem was never you, Daniel. It was their prejudice, and now you're going to have the chance to show what you're capable of." The coffees arrived, and they sat in silence for a few minutes, processing everything. Finally, Daniel asked, "And how is it going to work? When do I start? What will I do exactly?" Marcia explained all the details. His role as a consultant, the autonomy he would have, the projects he could develop. She was also honest about the context. She told him about the financial deal she had made, about the conditions she imposed, and about the changes that were being implemented in the company. Daniel listened to everything attentively. When she finished, he said, "So I'm going to be part of a larger transformation. It's not just about my hiring. It's about changing the company's culture." "Exactly. And that's why I need you to know that it might not be easy. Some people there might resist. They might see you as someone who was imposed from the outside. But if you focus on your work, on the quality of what you deliver, you will earn their respect." Daniel nodded, determined. "I'm ready. I won't waste this chance." "I know you won't," Marcia said with confidence. "In fact, Fabio, the commercial manager, will get in touch with you today to settle the details. But I wanted to tell you personally first." They spent another hour talking. Daniel told her about his trajectory, his dreams, his frustrations. Marcia shared a bit about her own story, about the values that guided her choices. When they finally said goodbye, Daniel hugged her tight. "Thank you, Marcia. Truly, you changed my life." Marcia smiled. "You are going to change your own life with the work you do. I only opened the door." In the following days, everything happened quickly. Fabio contacted Daniel and formalized the hiring. The first day of work was set for the following week, but before that, Daniel was invited to a meeting with the sales team and the other professionals who worked at the showroom. It was a crucial moment. Fabio, following the guidelines Marcia had given, presented Daniel not as someone who was being imposed, but as a qualified professional who would bring new ideas and perspectives. Some realtors received the news well. Others, visibly skeptical, maintained a polite but distant posture. Fernando, the realtor who had served Marcia on the first visit, was among the skeptics. But Daniel did not let himself be intimidated. He presented an impressive portfolio, showed previous projects, explained his vision of how correct setting could increase the perceived value of the properties. His passion and knowledge were evident, and even the most resistant had to recognize that he knew what he was talking about. In parallel, the implementation of the service training began. Marcia, through Roberto, hired a consultancy specialized in diversity and inclusion to develop a specific program for the Pinheiros Premium team. The training was not presented as a punishment, but as an opportunity for professional growth. The employees learned about unconscious biases, how judgments based on appearance could damage business, and the importance of treating all clients with the same respect and attention. At first there was resistance. Some employees thought it was an exaggeration, that they were being unfairly accused. But as the training progressed, many began to recognize patterns in their own behavior that they had never noticed before. Fernando, in particular, had a striking transformation. During one of the sessions, he shared a story that had deeply impacted him. He told how his sister, who was a teacher, had been treated poorly at a car dealership because the salespeople assumed she didn't have the conditions to buy a new vehicle. The anger and frustration he felt hearing that story made him realize he had done exactly the same thing with other clients. "I had never stopped to think that each person I served was someone's daughter, sister, mother," he said, visibly moved. "I always treated it as a game of numbers. If the person didn't seem to have money, I discarded them and moved on to the next. But now I see how wrong that was." This vulnerability from Fernando opened space for others to also share their reflections. The team, little by little, began to transform. Meanwhile, Daniel began working on the settings for the apartments. His first task was to reimagine the presentation of one of the penthouses that Marcia had acquired. He created a concept that mixed modernity with coziness, using a sophisticated but accessible color palette, furniture that demonstrated functionality and style, and decorative details that created a visual story. When the penthouse was reopened for visitation, the impact was immediate. Clients who previously passed through quickly now stopped, took photos, and commented on every detail. Several realtors came personally to thank Daniel, saying his work was facilitating sales. Even Fabio, who had initially been skeptical, recognized the value Daniel was adding. He called him for a private conversation in his office. "Daniel, I need to tell you something. When Marcia imposed your hiring as a condition of the deal, I was irritated. I thought it was an unnecessary interference, but I was wrong. Completely wrong. You are exceptional at what you do, and I apologize for not seeing that when you came here for the first time. Daniel was surprised but also touched by the sincerity. Thank you, Fabio, that means a lot to me. Fabio continued, You know, this whole experience made me rethink a lot of things, about how I lead, about how I make decisions, about how I judge people. Marcia gave us a hard but necessary lesson, and I'm grateful for that, even if it hurt to admit we were wrong. In the following weeks, the transformation at Pinheiros Premium was consolidating. The showroom began to receive more diverse clients, and the service improved significantly. Stories of positive experiences began to circulate, and the company's reputation, which had been tarnished by discriminatory practices, began to rebuild on more solid foundations. Marcia followed everything closely, but always discreetly. She didn't want the spotlight, she wanted results, and she was seeing those results happen. One day she received a call from Vera, the first person she had talked to about the case. Marcia, did you see? I passed by the showroom yesterday and went in just to see how it was. It's another place. The realtors were attending an elderly lady with the greatest attention, showing various options, explaining everything with patience. I was moved. Marcia smiled. It's good to know it changed for real. And all thanks to you, Vera said. You did what we thought was impossible. You brought justice. It wasn't just me, Marcia responded. It was Daniel with his work. It was Fabio agreeing to change. It was Fernando and other realtors willing to learn. It was a collective effort. But you were the one who started it all, Vera insisted. And we will never forget that. When she hung up the phone, Marcia allowed herself to feel pride. Not arrogant pride, but that quiet pride of someone who knows they made a difference. Not through violent confrontations or public exposures, but through strategy, patience, and the unshakable belief that change was possible. Roberto, who had observed the whole journey closely, hugged her from behind while she looked out the window. You are incredible, you know. Marcia turned and kissed him softly. We are incredible. Because you supported me at every step. You never questioned, never doubted. You were just here. I will always be, he promised. That night, Marcia wrote in her notebook. That same frayed notebook she carried on all the visits to the showroom. She wrote about everything that had happened, about the people she met, about the changes she witnessed. And at the end, she wrote a reflection that summarized it all. Justice is not a destination. It is a journey, and every step on that journey counts. Every time we choose to act instead of ignoring, every time we use our privilege to lift others, every time we refuse to accept the unjust as normal, we are building a better world. And this better world is not abstract. It is Daniel having a chance. It is Vera being treated with respect. It is Fernando learning to see people beyond appearance. It is real, tangible, human. She closed the notebook and placed it on the shelf, beside other notebooks full of stories and reflections. That chapter was closing, but Marcia knew there would be others. Because as long as there was injustice, she would be there, pedaling on her old bicycle, wearing her simple clothes, observing, learning, and when necessary, acting. And that was the true essence of who she was. Not the wife of a millionaire businessman, not the woman who closed a 20 million deal, but simply Marcia. A woman who believed that appearances were superficial, that talents deserved to be recognized, and that human dignity was non-negotiable. And at that moment, sitting in her simple house beside the man she loved, looking at the city that had raised and shaped her, Marcia knew she had done exactly what she should do. Not for recognition, not for glory, but because it was right. And in the end, that was the only justification that mattered. 6 months had passed since that first visit of Marcia to the Pinheiros Premium showroom, and on that Saturday morning, while pedaling through the city on her old bicycle, she decided to pass in front of the place that had been the epicenter of everything. The building remained imposing, mirrored, shining under the São Paulo sun. But something was different. There was a new energy there. Marcia could feel it even from a distance. She parked the bicycle and stood observing for a few minutes. She saw clients of all types entering and leaving. An elderly woman with a cane, accompanied by an attentive realtor who held the door for her. A young couple wearing casual clothes, being received with genuine smiles. A man in overalls, probably coming straight from work, talking animatedly with another realtor about apartment plans. Marcia smiled. That was real. The change had taken root. She was about to leave when she saw Daniel coming out of the building. He carried a tablet and a large folder, probably full of projects. When his eyes crossed with Marcia's, his face lit up. Marcia, what a nice surprise. They hugged affectionately. Daniel was different, more confident, lighter. There was an energy in him that didn't exist 6 months ago. "How are you?" Marcia asked, already knowing the answer by the sparkle in his eyes. "I'm incredible. Seriously, I've never been this well professionally. And personally too, this opportunity changed everything for me." They walked to a bench in the nearby plaza and sat down. Daniel began telling her about the projects he was developing. He had set up 8 more apartments, each with a different proposal, and all were generating impressive results. Sales of the development had accelerated, and Daniel was receiving recognition not only within the company, but in the market. "Last week I received a proposal from another construction company," he told her. "They wanted to hire me as the design coordinator for all their developments. The salary was double what I earn here." Marcia's eyes widened. "And did you accept?" Daniel shook his head. "No, I talked to Fabio and Ottavio. They not only matched the offer but created a new position for me. Now I am the Director of Customer Experience. I take care not only of the settings, but of the client's entire journey from the first contact to the delivery of the keys." "That is wonderful, Daniel." He held her hand. "And it's all thanks to you. You not only gave me a chance, you gave me back confidence in myself. I was almost giving up, thinking that maybe I wasn't good enough. And you appeared and changed everything." Marcia felt her eyes moisten. "You were always good enough, Daniel. You just needed someone to give you the opportunity to prove it." They stayed talking for some more time. Daniel told her about how the work environment had improved, about how the realtors now treated him with genuine respect, about how Fabio had become a mentor to him. "And Fernando?" Marcia asked. "How is he?" Daniel smiled. "Fernando changed a lot. He is now one of the main advocates of the new practices. He even created an informal mentoring system for new realtors, teaching them to treat all clients with equality. Last week, he told me he closed a Millionaire sale with a client he almost dismissed because of appearance. He said he remembered everything he learned in the training and decided to give a real chance. And it worked." Marcia nodded, satisfied. It was exactly what she hoped for. Not just superficial change, but deep transformation that perpetuated itself. When they said goodbye, Daniel hugged Marcia once more. "You are an inspiration, Marcia, for me and for many people. I hope one day to be able to do for others what you did for me." Marcia smiled. "You are already doing it. Every time you treat someone with respect, every time you use your position to lift others, you are passing it forward. That is how change spreads." While pedaling back home, Marcia thought of all the people who had been impacted by that journey. Vera, who now entered any place with the confidence that she would be treated with dignity. Patricia, who had become Marcia's friend and frequently sought her out to talk about other injustices she witnessed and how to face them. Rodrigo, who had gotten a job at another company and was building his career with success. And she also thought of the people at Pinheiros Premium itself. Fernando, who had faced his own prejudices and emerged as a better person. Fabio, who had learned that leadership was not just about numbers, but about people. Ottavio, who had had the humility to admit mistakes and the courage to change them. But the person Marcia thought of most was herself, because that experience had also transformed her. It had reaffirmed her belief that one person, with determination and strategy, could indeed make a difference. That power was not just in money or social position, but in the courage to act. When she arrived home, Roberto was in the garden, as always. He saw her and smiled. "Passed by the showroom again, didn't you?" Marcia nodded. "How do you know?" Roberto laughed. "I know that look. It's the look of someone who is satisfied with what they did." She approached and hugged him. "You know what makes me happiest? It's not just that Daniel is well or that the company changed. It's that all of this proves that when we use our privilege in the right way, when we don't hide behind indifference, we can really change lives." Roberto kissed her forehead. "You always knew that. I just had the luck to be by your side to witness it." That night, Marcia opened her notebook once more, but this time not to note cases of injustice or plan strategies. this time to write a final reflection on everything that had happened. It began like this. 6 months ago, I entered a showroom on a bicycle, dressed in simple clothes, and was judged before even opening my mouth. They laughed at me silently. They underestimated me completely. And that experience could have left me only frustrated and indignant, but I chose to transform it into something bigger. She continued writing, letting her thoughts flow freely. She wrote about the importance of not accepting injustice as normal, about how true strength is not in ostentation, but in the capacity to act with wisdom and patience, about how real change happens not through aggressive confrontations, but through intelligent strategies that force people to face their own contradictions. And she wrote about the greatest lesson of all, that appearances are the most superficial and deceptive way to judge someone, that behind simple clothes can exist deep wisdom, that behind an old bicycle can exist a transformative power, and that underestimating someone based on how they dress is not just unfair, it is profoundly stupid. In the end, Marcia wrote, "If I could give one piece of advice to those who judge by appearance, it would be this. The person you are dismissing might be exactly the one who has the power to change everything, and when you realize that, it might be too late." She closed the notebook and looked out the window. The city of São Paulo stretched out before her, with millions of stories happening simultaneously. How many injustices were occurring at that exact moment? How many people were being underestimated, discarded, ignored? Impossible to solve all, but possible to solve some, and each one that was solved created a ripple effect. Daniel, who now had power, would certainly use that power to lift others. Fernando, who had learned the lesson, would certainly teach it to new colleagues. The transformation that Marcia had started would continue spreading, touching lives she would never know. And perhaps someday, someone who had been impacted by this change would do the same for another person. And so, slowly, the world would become a little more just. 2 weeks later, Marcia received an unexpected invitation. It was from Otavio asking her to visit the showroom for a special occasion. Curious, she accepted. When she arrived there on the scheduled date, she was received with a surprise. The showroom was full of people, the entire sales team, the administrative staff, some clients who had become friends of the company, and even representatives from other construction companies. In the center of the hall there was a new plaque. It was discreet but significant. It said, "Marcia Almeida Service Center, where everyone is welcome." Marcia was speechless. She looked at Otavio, who approached with a sincere smile. "We wanted to honor you," he said, "not just for the financial investment, but for the investment in us, in our humanity. You taught us that success is not just about numbers, it's about doing the right thing." Fabio approached as well. "Marcia, you not only changed our company, you changed our lives, and we want every person who enters here to know that it was you who started this transformation." There was applause, tears, hugs. Marcia was deeply moved, not because she liked recognition, but because it meant the message had been understood, that the change was real and valued. Daniel was there too, in the middle of the crowd, smiling with pride. They exchanged a look, and at that moment no words were necessary. Both knew what that represented. When Marcia finally managed to speak, her voice trembled slightly. "Thank you for all this, but I want you to know that I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just refused to accept the unacceptable, and that is something all of us can do, every day, in our own lives." She looked around at all those faces. Each one has the power to make a difference. It doesn't have to be something grand. It can be just treating someone with respect when others don't. It can be giving a chance to someone who is being ignored. It can be questioning unfair practices instead of simply accepting them. Small actions create large transformations. There was more applause and the celebration continued. But for Marcia, the most significant moment was when a young realtor, who had been hired recently, timidly approached. "Mrs. Marcia, I just wanted to say thank you. I am the daughter of immigrants, and I grew up hearing that I would never be taken seriously in this kind of environment because of my origin. But here, I am treated with respect. My work is valued. And all of this started with the change you provoked." Marcia held the young woman's hands. "What is your name?" "Camilla." "Camilla, you are here because you are talented. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. And when you reach positions of power, remember to open doors for other people like you." The young woman nodded with tears in her eyes. "I will remember, I promise." When Marcia left that showroom for the last time, it wasn't by bicycle. Roberto had gone to pick her up by car, knowing that would be a special day. But before getting into the car, she looked once more at the mirrored building. And for the first time, she didn't see just a symbol of exclusion and prejudice. She saw a symbol of transformation, of hope, of living proof that change was possible. On the way back home, Marcia and Roberto talked about everything that had happened, about the complete journey, from that first humiliating visit to the celebration of that day. "Do you regret anything?" Roberto asked. Marcia thought for a moment. "No, not even the initial humiliation, because it was what gave me the motivation to act. If I had been well treated from the start, maybe I would never have discovered the pattern. I would never have helped Daniel, Vera, and so many others. So in a strange way, I'm grateful even for the bad moments." Roberto smiled. "You managed to find light even in the darkest experiences." "It's the only way to live," Marcia responded, "because darkness exists, injustice exists. But if we just stay lamenting, nothing changes. We need to be the light we want to see." When they arrived home, Marcia went straight to her favorite corner, the armchair near the window where she used to read and reflect. She took her notebook and wrote one last entry about that story. What started with laughs of contempt ended with recognition. What started with underestimation ended with transformation. And the greatest victory wasn't the money, it wasn't the tribute, it wasn't the recognition. It was seeing Daniel confident. It was seeing Fabio transformed. It was seeing Fernando teaching others not to repeat his mistakes. It was knowing that this change would continue to exist long after I left that room. She paused, and then wrote the conclusion. "In the end, the true power was never in the clothes I wore or the bank account I had. It was in the refusal to accept the unacceptable, in the courage to act when it would be easier to ignore, and in the unshakable belief that every person, regardless of how they dress or where they come from, deserves dignity." Marcia closed the notebook for the last time. That story was complete, but she knew other stories would come. Because while she was alive, as long as she had the capacity to act, she would continue doing what she believed to be right. And perhaps, just perhaps, other people would be inspired by her. They would learn that they didn't need to passively accept the injustices they witnessed, that they had the power, each in their own way, to create change. That night, Marcia slept with her heart at peace. She had done what she should do. She had used her privilege in the right way. She had transformed anger into action, and action into real change. And when the sun rose the next day, she woke up ready for whatever lay ahead. Because life was that, a constant cycle of challenges and opportunities. And Marcia chose, always, to be on the side of those who needed a voice, to be on the side of justice, to be on the side of what was right. And that choice, made every day in every small action, was what defined who she really was. Not the wife of a millionaire, not the woman who closed a big deal, but simply Marcia, an ordinary woman with extraordinary values who believed the world could be better and who dedicated her life to proving that this belief was not naive, but absolutely possible. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Marcia and Daniel has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of transformation and justice, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Was it Marcia's courage, Fernando's transformation, Daniel's rebirth?